probably get started, and we're recording this session, so we'll definitely share it out afterwards. And so if anybody is a little bit late, they'll be able to see the beginning as well.
Yeah, and just to comment because Abigail made one final comment, making a very good point that the sound could come through poorly, and that would not be desirable. So I'm with you on that. Thanks, Abigail. And without further ado, um, let's get started. So welcome to our office hours. I'm Bob Erdschek. I'm Yellowdig's, what am I? Oh, academic lead. And I work with our clients, like hopefully all of you, to help you get the most out of Yellowdig, talking about pedagogy and best practices and sharing ideas for the classroom, etc. And I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Brian Verdun.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm our head of client success. Um, I started with Yellowdig about 2.5 years ago. If you haven't heard my story, I started out in psychology and education in the sort of research track. And I started doing a lot of consulting on technology development and started at Yellowdig, as I said, about 2.5 years ago, doing a lot of the research into the platform. Um, uh, Bob will definitely fill you in on a little bit of his background, but with his teaching experience, we were wanting to host a lot of these sessions to try to answer questions that people had and sort of combine what we know from our data with classroom experience. And what we're hearing from instructors and students. So this specific one, we've gotten a lot of questions about what instructors, should be doing in their communities to manage them. And so a lot of the discussion today will focus on those types of questions. We did take questions beforehand, and please feel free to sort of add additional ones. If you do add additional ones, during the session, it may be the case that we wait to the end to address those newer ones because we already did get a bunch, but we'll try to get to as many of them as we can.
And I would also just add that if you are going to pose a question, while we do have the chat here, it's probably easier if you do post that in the Q&A, which you can see, I assume you can see at the bottom right near the leave button in your Zoom window. That'll just make it a little more easier for us to notice your questions if you post them there. And so I did forget to mention my background. I was at the turn of the century, which is fun to say. I worked as an instructional technologist, faculty developer, helping instructors even back then get their courses online. And although I love the promise of online learning, the actual pedagogy and the tools that were available then did not really allow, I don't think, the ability to create real learning communities or the ability to engage those students who were either distant or introverted or just didn't get an opportunity to speak in the classroom. So I went on to teach for over a decade, political science. And in my teaching, I looked for other tools outside of the learning management systems, and they, like Facebook and Twitter, and they came with their own set of problems. So I found Yellowdig, and it really ticked all the boxes for me. And I was lucky enough that they had me let me on, and I've been here for a year and I love it. So Brian, where shall we start?
Yeah. So, we always get questions. First of all, just where's the best place to find answers to my Yellowdig questions? And hopefully you already know this if you're using Yellowdig, but um, you know, help.yellowdig.com, we've tried to make really a one-stop shop for any questions that you do have. We try to break it down by different sort of user groups, so you can kind of easily explore it, but you can also search. The other thing is that we've made the top bar of that knowledge base, be where you can access other kinds of information, contact support, see if the website status is good. I wanted to particularly highlight the instructor certification course. If you haven't taken it, we think there's quite a bit of information in there that might hit on things that we're not going to cover today, or that we hope that everybody knows before they get started with Yellowdig. But we've heard that even people that have been using Yellowday for a little bit have learned quite a bit from that course as well. So if you haven't checked it out, I would certainly suggest it.
While you're there, Brian, oh, just going back, I think that it's worthwhile to show the support button just also. If you look to the, there we go, contact support. If you ever have any kind of technical issues or anything like that, your best bet for the quickest response is to click that button, click contact support, let us know what's going on, share a screenshot if you can, and our crack support team will be there to help you and get you back there. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Let's go.
Right.
So we did get a number of community questions, and we did ask that this time that they be related primarily to the role of the instructor and things that you have questions about as far as how to interact with students, how to get your community started. So let's go to number one, which is, how do I get a community started? What things should I do when the course is just launching? This is it's great, two questions, because I think, Brian, that getting started and setting expectations with students is probably one of the most important things that you can do in a Yellowdig community, to let them know what the purpose of the community is and what you expect from them and what they ought to expect from you. I think is fundamental in this regard. You're nodding your head, so I was going to let you talk, but I can go on.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, my recommendations is really to be explicit in setting out what's going on. Yellowdig has a wonderful feature where you can record a 90-second video, which is plenty of time to go in and tell the students at the outset, hi, welcome to our learning community. I mean, obviously you can say what you want, but I would encourage something like, welcome to our learning community. This is a place for us to share experiences and whatever's going on in the world related to the course. It's a place where you can get to know each other to some degree, in more than you would be able to in a face-to-face class. And you can bring in what's important to you in the community. But keep in mind that we are in a community of learning here, and we'd like to sort of, while it's fine to have some conversations that are outside of that, let's keep it, friendly and also related to what we're talking about here. Things like that. Brian, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important at the outset to be really clear with students about your expectations, right? And one thing that we see, time and again, is if you communicate clear expectations to start with, and then model what you really want students to do, a lot of times, you know, you avoid any of the potential problems that would get a community to start slowly or in the wrong direction. And so, that goes for everything from sort of the level of participation that you're expecting, um, how you'll sort of respond to things that you might consider sort of off topic or irrelevant, um, to just also, how you're going to manage the community and what your level of participation is going to be.
Yeah, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about your level of participation as we go a little bit further in here, because that is something important to sort of consider. And let's take it back a step, Brian. Brian and I had a wonderful conversation yesterday, sort of about, I think the first thing that instructors have to consider is, what is the purpose of the Yellowday community? What is it, the purpose of having it, and what are the outcomes that you want to get from it? And we would say that the purpose is to create an extended opportunity for students to learn from each other and to learn from you, and to really use the real world and highlight what's important to them, and bring it into the community. And for you, one of the purposes is to inform your teaching, to know what those students are thinking, be able to see how they're interacting with the content in a way that you wouldn't be able to see in a classroom or in a regular discussion board, and sort of adjust from that. That's part of it. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton to add to that really. Sorry, I was reading one of the questions in the Q&A. So.
Okay. Well, that's fine. But I think it is important that, as you conceive of your Yellowdig community, that you also conceive of, not only, here's a place for students to communicate, but what kinds of outcomes you want from it, and what kinds of sort of behaviors and contents and thing like that that you want brought into the community. I think that's really important for you, and then to communicate that to your students. So that, though, that would sort of be the general advice on how to get started, to think that through, and then also to communicate to the students. Oh, one other thing, when you get started, set up topics. I mean, this is a functional thing, but it's really important. And I talk too much about topics, but topics are going to be the way that these conversations can ebb and flow. These topics are going to allow these conversations to reemerge when they're important, and to sort of subside when they're less important. It's going to make it much easier to find and follow them, and it's going to allow those students, it's going to force those students, frankly, to think a little bit more about what it is that they're bringing into the course and where it belongs. But ultimately, it's just going to make it easier to sort of follow the conversations.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty basic part of the setup. And honestly, it's one of two things that we think that you really have to set up before a course would start, or should, um, is thinking about the topics that you want to include, and the other part is the point system. But our recommendation is definitely to make these required. They should be by default. Um, but one of the big things that I think that this helps with, beyond anything else, is that as students are bringing information into the community, and they have to post with one of these topics, they sort of have to think in their head, does this actually fit into the course? Is this actually relevant to the course? And that one little kind of quick check that students have to make, I think, will tend to raise the bar overall, right? And the expectation is, hey, whatever you're sharing and posting here really does need to be, relevant to one of the topics of the course. Um, and you can always allow, if you want to have a coffee house topic or something like that. We have people do that kind of thing, but at least setting the expectation that, hey, if you're bringing something and you're claiming that this is relevant to the course, you have to associate it with something.
And related to that, because we're talking about it, Brian, if I were an instructor, which I was, how would I use topics to, sort of help me figure out where my students are, and what they need more of? And
Yeah, for sure. So, this is one piece of the topic data, that people may not have noticed or be aware of. But, um, you know, if you require topics, or if you're using topics and students are using them, you can come in and you'll be able to see which topics are sort of attracting student attention, at a either full community level, or beneath that at a topic, by user level, right? And the one sort of example I always give here is, imagine that this is a business course, and Olivia, a student, is an adult learner who, uh, is an accountant, right? And so they're talking in their community a lot about accounting, and really sort of demonstrating that they're an expert in that area. Maybe you take that as an opportunity to bring Olivia, into a synchronous session and have her talk for a few minutes about her accounting experiences. Maybe it's an opportunity to invite her to sort of lead, something of a discussion on a specific topic that she knows a lot about within Yellowdig. One important thing, and we'll talk more about this in terms of what level of presence and and what is the instructor's role in a community. But one important thing about getting students to really see the value of Yellowdig is making sure that it ties in interesting ways to other aspects of your course. And so, I definitely would recommend trying to find ways to either take conversations from Yellowdig and bring them into aspects of the course. For example, doing something like a Yellowdig spotlight for 10 minutes in a synchronous session where you talk about a couple of the most popular posts or things. Um, or finding interesting ways to have the students kind of connect the Yellowday experience to other aspects of the course.
Before we leave topics, just a couple other little teeny thoughts. First of all, that global view of topics really can help you adjust to what you should cover, what you might need to go back to, and what you probably can leave behind because you can see the engagement. But the other thing that we didn't mention before when we were talking about creating those topics is those topic names. Now that seems insignificant, but it really isn't. Using module one, module two, week one, week two, is not a way to get, is not how you want to name these topics to get that sort of ebb and flow. Instead, using the actual name of whatever that subject is going to make a lot more sense within the context of Yellowdig as far as that goes. And since we were talking about course launching and course setting up, we would recommend aligning those topics generally with your top level syllabus subject matter, but also leaving some, as Brian mentioned before, for certain course management types of functions like announcements, introductions, and like you said, what was it, coffee, what did you call it?
Coffee house is what a lot of people
Yeah.
call it, or yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think we can move on to the next exciting element of our discussion. Oh, by the way, I do want to reassure everyone who is in the Q&A in the chat that we are not ignoring your questions. We are just wanting to get through the questions that were submitted in advance, and we will absolutely get to your questions as well.
Yeah, I see a one chat from Eric Holt asking about different minimum word counts for topics. There are not currently, configurable different uh, word counts for different topics, um, and you know, just because it brings up sort of the subject of word counts in general. One thing that we've found over time is that, Yellowdig's minimum word counts, we have a suggestion that post, that you sort of not use more than 40 words for post or 20 words for comments. In general, I think that sort of lower minimum word counts is much better than really high ones. And in general, also, students will kind of post as much as they have to say that's relevant. And if you extend word counts much beyond that, they'll start just using filler. And the problem with that is not only is it not really adding value to that particular student's learning experience, but it's actually detracting from all of the other students that are going to have to sort of wade through more words for the sort of same value of content, if you will. So what we found is it's better to think about um, posting and commenting as sort of short is okay, and maybe require more of them rather than requiring really long ones that nobody will read. Because at the end of the day, a huge problem, or the problem that I think that we're mostly trying to solve, is to get students actually talking back and forth. And monologues do not contribute to good dialogue, and students will not read them. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I was just going to say it's some degree to being sort of performative versus actually creating listening and interacting. I mean, posting, is an essential part of what happens in a community because the conversations need to start, but we want to get the conversations going. I mean, that's where the thought and the interaction, comes from, and the learning together comes from. What are you going to show us, Brian?
Well, I was just going to quickly show, since we're kind of talking about it, quickly show the health check here. So this area in Yellowdig will show you your community and its percentile scores on a set of variables compared to Yellowdig's global median, or you can compare it to other communities within your organization if there are enough of them. But we're generating sort of average percentile scores from all of the variables beneath that, and we have sharing, listening, and interacting scores. One thing that I would pay a lot of attention to, and maybe if you're going to pay attention to one variable, it's the conversation ratio, which is the number of comments per post. Um, but the reason that we think that that's really super important is because students that are talking back and forth will actually end up reading a lot more posts. They will actually end up clicking into more hyperlinks, and they spend more time listening and consuming more of the information that's posted. Um, and then they also end up obviously interacting more with other students. And what we see in terms of health is, you know, the sharing score is not as relevant, which is all about sort of generating content. It's not nearly as relevant to student learning outcomes as them having high listening and interacting scores, and your communities having a lot of student interaction. And so, if I were to make one recommendation for everybody to pay attention to how much students are listening to each other, how much they're interacting with each other, and get just enough posts and enough interesting content in your community to get those good interactions going.
Brian, this question also brings me back to part of our discussion yesterday, and that's regarding, the idea of longer posts is to let students, at least I'm, assuming from the context, is to get students to more or less, show what they know in a way. And, I think we were talking yesterday that perhaps in some cases, this type of post is better as an assignment rather than a Yellowdig sort of comment, a written assignment that you submit. It goes back to our basic philosophy of, which is I think the next question actually, about not using weekly prompts. What you as the instructor absolutely have the power and the ability to have students write papers to you, and all written to the same assignment, and the same as the typical pedagogy of answer my prompt with 300 words and then comment on 2 of your students' posts. The problem, we think, to some degree, is that those aren't real conversations, right? When the students are commenting on each other's posts, it's not how you would have a conversation in real life. I think is one way to put it. And when we have a conversation, we don't all answer the same question. We see where that question leads us and go from there. So I think that's sort of one way to look at what we're trying to do in Yellowdig versus creating a written assignment that all the other students get to see, and then that they've all written to the same question. Brian?
Yeah. I wanted to just kind of quickly show a slide. So I'm sure most of you, or quite a few of you, have probably heard us talk a little bit about not having weekly prompts within Yellowdig. And I wanted to just bring a little bit of clarity on why we say that. What we see is sort of the damaging part of that, and then you know really talk with you guys a little bit about what we think you can sort of do instead. So, a lot of people will point out to us that they want their students to focus on a topic that's sort of important to the course. And that's one really core function of why people feel like they need to do weekly prompts within a discussion forum sort of setup. And I would also argue that some students and some particular groups of students really do crave a certain amount of that direction and clarity, which I think is why one of our sort of most important recommendations that we already talked about is that you really should be as clear as you can with what you expect students to do within the community before they ever arrive there, right? You know, describing your course, what you think the function of Yellowday should be for your course, and be pretty clear about that. But the reason that we talk about not having weekly prompts um, is because there are a couple damaging aspects of them. And I think, I put this graphic up here on the side to really try to communicate why Yellowdig focuses on the idea of a community and some of the functions that kind of come out of that idea, right? So if you think about a normal, discussion forum, the idea is really to have a certain amount of conversation and idea exchange around specific topics throughout the course, right? And that's one use case for sure of this concept. But when you start thinking about what is possible in a community, it expands sort of what the community can do. It can allow for asking questions and a little bit more of an information exchange that's not related to specific course topics. It can allow students to bring in outside references that are really relevant to the course. It can help with learning course content sort of directly. Maybe it can help with things as simple as like administrative tasks, like when is the test, right? That may not be something that helps that student's particular learning, but it certainly helps their success in the course and meeting the other learning objectives of the course, right? When is our next office hours session, or when can I talk to the TA to get some help with the test? Those are relevant questions to ask, and if you think about the community, it expands the sort of overall use case. So the damaging aspects of a weekly prompt are it forces the students into thinking about that community or that experience as being for a single purpose, which is only talking about those prompts. It can lead to certain problems with topical or temporal relevance, and by that I mean, um, you know, uh, I think Bob, your example of the Constitution, studying the Constitution is really relevant. You want to give that one?
So when as Brian mentioned, I taught American government and constitutional law and things like that, and in week two of the course is what I say. We talk about the Constitution itself and the structure of the Constitution, all that kind of stuff. And part of the Constitution deals with the election. And maybe some of you happen to notice there was a recent presidential election and all that kind of stuff that went along with it. And if it wasn't in week two, do I want my students nevertheless to interact with that material? Do I want to see how they're processing it in real time, in real life, with real events? And the answer is absolutely yes. And that may not be in week two, it may be in week 7 or 8. And that's great. That's the opportunity to now build upon everything they've learned and apply it, and that's what I'm looking for personally.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think allowing some flexibility allows topics to be talked about sort of out of order if they need to be for some reason, or to allow current events to impact those. If you've designed your prompts months or even sometimes years in advance of actually teaching the course, those those topics that you're sort of surfacing through those weekly prompts maybe not nearly as relevant as other things that could be talked about. I think that deadlines are a huge problem in terms of a student participation, right? If every student procrastinates the deadlines, there is no time to have good conversations, right? Everybody is just responding to the prompts and they're not really having a back and forth conversation. And the third one I just want to mention right now is also overproduction of posts, right? If everybody is responding, everybody is focused on creating posts, nobody is reading the posts and then actually talking about them. And if they're sort of earning most of their participation by posting, then they're not commenting. And so that sort of hurts the discussion right from the outset. And to kind of move on from that, we think about the role of the instructor if you're going to do any kind of prompting to really be thinking about them as conversation starters. And here are a couple of specific recommendations that I think we would have. So for one thing, I think that students should always be told to create their own posts. And I want to just describe quickly, given the design of our system, why that is. So the way that Yellowdig works is that new posts that are created come in at the top of the feed. And then anytime that somebody interacts with that post and replies to it, it will go back to the top of the feed. If something gets posted and nobody ever responds to it, it will just get replaced and fall farther down the feed as time goes on. And if you think about the student experience as they come in, they're going to see the top of the feed and whatever is there, the last thing that was created or the last thing that was interacted with. So they're always going to be seeing and interacting with the most recently relevant things that have been posted in the community or things that have active conversations going on. Um, and those posts that have really good conversations will continue to go to the top. So you want students to create their own posts so that those posts can sort of, for lack of a better way of saying it, compete a little bit for the space at the top of the um, of the community. And the reason that you want that is because those posts that end up getting, shoved back to the top, it means that there's still an interesting, active conversation going on, and that those posts really did um, complete the job that they were intended to do, which is that students are reading them, students are responding to them, and they're having a robust conversation around them. So the first thing is, we've pretty much never seen a community where instructors had their students all respond only to their own posts, where there was actually good, robust, easy to follow conversations going on. So definitely always have your students create their own posts. Um, then just to sort of go back to that other points, uh, we think that if you are creating a prompt where you say, hey students, respond to this, we think they should be optional. Um, and that's to say, we think you should always invite students to contribute other relevant, interesting posts to the course, right? Something they run into in their daily lives, something they have questions about that came up in a course. This helps ensure that the community really can be this multi-functioning place where students are getting really relevant, really good information. If students don't have something relevant to share, or they, and you make it clear that part of the criterion here is that those things be relevant, they'll just answer your conversation starter or whatever. They'll sort of respond to what you've asked them to respond to, but you want students to have other options because they will use that freedom in really good ways that end up helping the whole community be a more useful place for everyone. I would strongly suggest part of the no weekly prompts is the weekly part of that. If you want to sort of have students pay attention to specific pieces of content and maybe you ask questions, I wouldn't post them on a schedule. And here's why. If you post it on a schedule, it'll feel to students like an assignment. And if they treat it like an assignment, they'll procrastinate to the deadline of when you're going to, post the next thing. And that really interrupts actual, back and forth conversations. It really interrupts students coming in. And more importantly, they really kind of think, okay, I just have to come once a week and check the box, right? Check that box. Um, Rather, if you post them randomly and there's just sort of, students don't know whether they're going to find a new topic there or don't know sort of what other students might have shared in the interim, they're going to be more curious to sort of come back more often. They're going to be more likely to jump back into conversations that they've started and sort of continue them until there's nothing more interesting to say about
Brian, it's we're moving along in time, so I think we ought to
them.
sort of move on. The question that was next on the questions was, I would like to talk about engagement and intrinsic motivation. Some students see it as a chore and some really enjoy it. How do I help them see the importance of discussion with peers? I think that's an important question.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a couple of answers to that that I think are pretty important. So for me, I think one of the biggest things that helps students understand the value of this is having them experience a good back and forth conversation to start with, right? So that helps. And but the other thing I think is is important here is being clear with students about what you expect and what they're going to get out of it, and sort of presenting that to them up front, and then um, recognizing the content that is really truly checking that box, and that is um, the students that are participating well, and doing a good job of sharing information to really recognize them. um, what ends up happening if you encourage the right behaviors by putting accolades on posts, by using some of those reactions on posts, what ends up happening is that the students that get those things try harder to get them, and they post more relevant, better information in the community. Those students that are not getting them see that other students are being recognized for producing that good content. You're interacting with them a little bit, you're commenting on them, um, and they'll start trying to also get those points and to try to get those recognitions from you. If you can do that, everybody will post more valuable stuff in the community, and then the community itself becomes a place that becomes uh, an intrinsic motivator, right? The community has value. Students are participating there because they don't see it as just an assignment. They see it as something that is adding value to their education.
So I think all that's true, but I would also add that this is another thing, that having the students have a clear understanding of what the community is for right from the outset will make a big difference with regard to that. If the students see it as something that's going to add value to their education as at the beginning, they're more likely to engage in it in that regard, as opposed to seeing it as, I need to do this for my grade. So again, that goes back to explaining what the purpose of the community is, the ability to learn from each other, the ability to have a period of time outside of the synchronous sessions or the live classroom sessions that allows them to ask questions that they hadn't thought of before or during class, or weren't able to say in the limited period of time that they have there. The ability to learn from more than just you and the person sitting next to them in class. All of these things, to find people of these, we all have diverse experiences and backgrounds, and we all find different things interesting, and this is how we learn from each other, and what we're providing is a much bigger platform for that learning, a much bigger platform than having just the sage on the stage and the people sitting in the front row raising their hands. This is an opportunity for everyone to find their niche in the class. All right, so the next question, again, these are wonderful questions. I just want to, I want to, yeah. Next question is, what level of presence should I have? We get this one a lot too, and this is really important. And I don't know, Brian, should we ask some students?
Yeah. So we very recently, yesterday, had a conversation with some students about the level of presence that they wanted, and we wanted to just play a couple of those clips for you guys, and I hope it works well. Um, Wanted to play a couple of those clips because we think that it's better just to hear it straight from them rather than us, and we can fill in a little bit around it as well. But um, uh, I'm gonna run through those, and here we go.
It should jump to the time.
Or maybe not.
I have them set on just to play automatically, so.
Yeah, they should. It's loading. All right. Well, okay. Well, maybe that's a failed experiment. So, uh, here we go.
We
All
can
right.
just talk about it while we're waiting. This first clip was going to say, we had a student, I can't remember if she was a grad student or not, who just said that, getting that occasional thumbs up from the professor is really important to her. I mean, not every time, and she can certainly live without it if it doesn't come. But when she does something that it feels like it ought to be recognized, that's she loves to get those sort of notifications. And I guess another way to look at it is that you want to be there. Like, students want you to care about them. I mean, and that was some of the other commentary that came through. That doesn't mean you have to answer every question. In fact, you shouldn't answer every question. Students mention that as well. But students want to know that you're there, and that you don't even have to read every one of their posts, and they understand that as well. And again, that's something you should set in the expectations. But you are a citizen of the community as they are. Hopefully you want to get them interested in the subject matter that you're teaching to some degree. So this is an opportunity for you in some ways to interact just the way they're interacting, and bring in the things that are cool to you, or whatever. If I was posting on Yellowdig today, and I'm not going to go there. I was going to talk about something else, but it just sharing the things that get you going, but also, letting them take the lead, realizing that if you are headlining the whole conversation in Yellowdig, the students are going to become programmed to say, I need to respond to the instructor, just as they would have in the prompted posting, right? Instead, you want to give them the opportunity to take the lead when you can. You're certainly okay to ask questions from time to time when they're relevant, and stuff like that. And you can comment on students in the same manner that other students are commenting. Let them know, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that you had that experience, or something like that. But you don't need to answer every question, or comment on every single post.
Yeah, to give some sort of maybe more concrete advice, we think the accolades really should be considered a reward for a particularly good or relevant or useful content that people have posted and that get good conversations going. I would typically recommend those are put on maybe 10% of posts if you wanted sort of a hard number, right? They should be possible to get, but not something that you put on every single post. We do see some instructors trying to like put reactions on everything. That really dilutes whether students value them, right? Like, you just clicking through reactions on every single post and comment makes them feel like you're kind of surveilling them rather than, recognizing good content and sort of encouraging that content. I think one other thing I like to talk about is to think a little bit about what this experience would feel like if you were in a regular classroom, right? So, if you were in a regular classroom and you had students that were each sort of talking about an individual little topic, right, string or whatever, and you were walking around the room to try to talk to students, first of all, if you sort of walk around too much and you walk up to those groups, a lot of times they're going to sort of stop talking to each other, turn their attention to you, and kind of wait for you to say things, right? So you do have to think a little bit about how your presence might influence those conversations. That's point number one. But that's not to say that you shouldn't walk around the room and kind of hear what's going on, and jump in if you hear something that somebody says is wrong, or maybe jump in if you feel like you have something to add, or you just find the conversation really interesting, right? Feel free to kind of jump in and show a little bit of that humanness, and you know think of your job as really being, um, I always talk about it as sort of like the model citizen, right? What would you hope other students would do, right? You wouldn't want any student to uh, post and comment and react to every single post that every other student created. So your goal shouldn't be to do that either. Really kind of be a citizen.
Yeah, and just to put a sort of a different look at it, is that Yellowdig is a great platform for students to ask and answer each other's questions. And that's great. This is another clip that we were going to show you actually. But that's great because it allows students to have the agency and to feel comfortable asking questions where they might not have otherwise. They don't have to ask you the question every time. You don't have to get 50 emails in your inbox and respond to each and every one of them. They can answer each other's questions, and that's great. But one place where students can feel left hanging, while we think this is a fantastic use of Yellowdig, it's still incumbent upon you to identify that answer that is the one that they should rely on. And the point that was made in the video clip I was going to say was that if an instructor doesn't come in and a number of students answer another student's question, they're generally going to assume that the last answer in that thread is the one that must be the correct answer because the instructor didn't come in and do anything about it. So by adding an accolade to the verified response accolade, or you can call it instructor approved or what have you, to look, if you go in and look at those student answers to each other's questions, you can add, after giving them some time to do that, you can add that accolade to show them this is the one that I've looked at and this is the one I want you to look at when you're studying. So I think that's a relatively important piece of the puzzle in a number of ways. It's important to allow students to do this, but it's also important for you to go in there and say, this is the right answer so that they have a sense of that. I just want to move on. The next question on the board, and then we'll get to the questions in the Q&A. And I think this is also an important question. What are your recommendations for handling misinformation and racism or racism in the discussion boards? While sometimes other students address misinformation, what is the recommended faculty role for addressing this issue? And Brian, while you're there, the first thing I want to show is the flag post feature, as you probably guessed, because you were headed there anyway. Brian?
Yeah, so one function that is here and students can see it and so can instructors is the flagged post functionality. So, there's a whole bunch of things for moderating posts that appear in this meatball menu with each post. And one thing that you can encourage students to do and that you can use yourself is to flag posts that you would consider inappropriate, off topic, maybe worrisome from sort of like violence standpoint or anything like that, and to have them give a reason. And when people report a post, it is pulled down from the community and it will be put into um, the flagged post area uh, of the community.
You get a notification about that also as the instructor,
Yeah.
as the community owner. And again, just to be clear, students can do this as well. They can flag posts as well. And then you, as the instructor, have the ability to decide whether or not that post should stay out of the community, or if it, you can put it back if for some reason it was not something that ought to have been flagged. So you do have the control over that. Again, going to say in expectations up front, tell students not to post certain what you don't want them to post. Tell them what you do want them to post. I mean, this is a community and we're all citizens of this community. Treat each other accordingly.
Yeah. And just to build on that a tiny little bit, you do also see which student flagged the post to begin with, right? So some people were worried, we made it pull these posts down sort of quickly and put it in there so that if there was any kind of worrisome content, it would get out of the community pretty quickly. But if a student sort of tries to flag posts that really shouldn't be, and they do that repeatedly, you would easily and quickly detect that student that's doing the flagging you might need to reach out to them and also possibly talk with them about their role in the community. So it kind of works on both levels.
A couple of other weapons that you have in your arsenal, I guess, you can create certain words to be blocked words in the community. And if people try to post with those words, they won't be able to do that. You also, as the instructor, have the ability to delete posts, to add or subtract points from any posts. And when you do that, you can give the student a reason why. So even if it is not flagged, but you see it, you can go in there and say, this post was not what we want to have in this community. All right, let's move on. Let's go to the Q&A now. So, Abigail.
I see Felicia mentioned the
Oh,
small group discussion in the class. I don't know if that came before or after when I talked
just
about
go
that,
for it. You're there.
but
Go for it.
it's a great. But it was a I guess great minds think alike. Um, that's all. She mentioned thinking about Yellowdig like going around in small group discussions in a class. I think that
Oh, that's what you said.
yeah. I don't know if I said it. I just noticed it. So.
Okay, so just going to go to the Q&A and then to the chat. Abigail says, copying settings from engaged one board to another. How do we do it? We tried to do it and we couldn't make it work. I'm sure we're just missing something.
So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. As um, if you're an organizational administrator, you can set a community as a default community, and that will cause all of the settings and the content to copy into any community created within that network. So I'm not sure what level of permissions you have, but if you have organization settings in your avatar menu, you can very likely go in, or you should be able to go in and set a default community for your organization, and that will cause that community to be copied for any newly created communities by default.
On the other hand, if you wanted to just copy your previous semester's course, Brian, when you create a new community, what would you do?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that you can do that. If you have a course that you really liked, you can go into basics here, and you'll notice at the bottom of the basics, there's the ability to copy this share link. Want to highlight this for a couple of different reasons, but mostly because you can put that share link into the community creation modal that comes up when you create a new community, and that will automatically use this community as this business 101 community or whatever your class is as a template where you can copy settings or uh, copy the content that you created.
All
These
right.
are also completely modular or mobile, right? So if you're an instructor and you want to share your community with another instructor, they would be able to use your link. If you're a course designer and you want to create templates for a whole set of courses, you could, create, you could use these links and give them to any other designer that might be working with you. So those share links are pretty useful functionality. The other thing you can do in the course create is copy content or copy settings from any community you already own, and you can just do that right in the modal that comes up when you create a new community.
So Abigail indicates that she attempted to use the share link and it did not work. So I guess I would request that Abigail, you copy whatever that link was perhaps and put it in an email to support@yellowdig.com and they can walk you through that. But that is the normal procedure for having it work. So I appreciate that you tried that and we'll try to help you out there. Abigail asked one other question. Are there any plans in the future to allow points for posting video, audio, or images? And before we talk about the future, let's talk about the present. So that is clearly not a feature that we have yet. But one thing that you could do, and I'm not saying it's ideal, but one thing that you could do in this regard is create an accolade for that type of post. And then you could just add it to those posts and assign a point value to it. That would be one way to accomplish that. I don't know if that's what you're looking for or not, but that could perhaps be what you wanted. You could always ask students to write, the minimum number of words with every accolade, with every video or audio post or what have you as well. But as far as the future goes, Brian?
Yeah, so that is something that we have been asked about quite a bit. It's definitely on our roadmap to allow basically any kind of like post attachment that you would do. Um, like adding a image, video files or whatever to have point values associated with those. It's definitely something that we get asked about. I think to Bob's point, it can be good for students to kind of have to describe a little bit what the video is and why they're posting it to begin with. And I guess one thing that I would say is if you keep the post and comment word counts reasonable, it's not that much to have to kind of generate a little bit of a topic or of a post and to maybe tee up some questions in that post or something like that. So that would be my current recommendation, but yeah, that is something that we're
So it is 1:57 p.m. I believe Brian and I are probably prepared to stay around for a little bit longer if anyone wants to, but if people have to leave, that's fine. But I do want to announce that we are going to be setting the next couple of these office hours sessions up, for one for March, one for April, and probably beyond that. We would love to hear from you as to particular focuses that you might wish us to talk about in a future one. It's been suggested to us that we do an advanced. I'm not quite sure what exactly that might mean or not. But I personally thought this was a great use of our time, this particular hour, talking about instructor focused subject matter. So we'd love to hear from you as to what some other type of focuses would be. And beyond that, I would like to also, for those of you who want to stick around, there are still a few questions in the chat that we haven't entirely gotten to that we can get to next. So just because it is, time to go, if anyone has to go, we will wish you a fond farewell and hope to see you again soon. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going. Sound good? All right. So there was a topic, or not a topic, a post a comment that Felicia made that I did not answer adequately while I was trying to focus on two things. Felicia says, I would like the ability to get a notification when prompts with certain topics are posted, for example, questions. My concern with using Yellowdig to post course announcements and handle student questions is they might be buried in the message feed and I or the students won't see them. Getting an email notification when a post with the topic questions is used would solve that problem. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a good suggestion. So I would definitely say that there's a couple of things that we would recommend that you do to like, I don't say head off the need for that, but one thing that I would suggest is having students use the at mention functionality, and we've had instructors talk to us about sort of thinking about it as a hand raise. But if you tell students that, hey, if you really want to get my attention, make sure you at mention me in the post. Then they could just at mention you as the instructor or at mention a TA, and that will basically let them raise their hand and say, hey, would like your opinion or like your answer to this question. So that's one way we've seen people.
And by the way, just to be clear, you will get a notification when they mention you,
Yeah,
assuming that your notification settings are at the defaults and you haven't changed that.
yeah.
So yeah, just wanted to make sure that that part of it was clear, that she will not, that she'll know that. And then Eric had another question that I also mishandled. How do students know how to check or how often to? That could seem pressing as well. In other words, he went on to say, when I answered his question incorrectly, apologize, Eric. And do students feel pressured to constantly go to Yellowdig? How often should they be visiting the community? And they should always access it via the course link I've established. Yes. I'm going to answer the second part first. They do not need to access Yellowdig via the course link after the first time that they've done that. They only need to do that the one time to make that LTI connection, connect Yellowdig with your course management system. After that, they can get into it by going to yellowdig.app or through the LMS if they prefer. And
Yeah.
then the previous part of the question, Brian?
It was like, how often should they be here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I don't know that I can answer that, right? It's sort of like in line with what you expect. But here's what I would say. I don't think there's an answer in terms of total amount of time, and I don't think that there uh, is an answer where maybe we hope that a lot of students that are finding a lot of value in this are participating really often, and if they're finding value in it, that they absolutely are. We want every student to come and have to participate a minimal amount so they get exposed to everything, right? And so that they are sort of participating. But the style of participation matters, I would argue, quite a bit more than the total amount of time, right? The important thing about these communities are that we get students interacting with one another, having back and forth conversations. Those conversations end up getting students to read more, to think more deeply about the material, and then talk back and forth about it and really sort of struggle with the ideas, right? That is the value of a discussion versus any other part of your course, right? So you need to get students talking, and in order for students to actually have back and forth conversations, you don't want them to come one time a week for 2 hours. They don't need to do that. It would be much better if they came once a day for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, because they'll have the ability to actually have a back and forth conversation with other students. So, what I would suggest is you want them to come back pretty often, and you want to set up the entirety of how you think about Yellowdig as a means for students to kind of regularly check in, for lack of a better way of saying it, interact with students, and to do that all throughout the course. And that's one of the reasons that we actually sort of dissuade the idea of communicating Yellowdig as a weekly assignment, and why we don't recommend doing weekly prompts. We want students to think of this as something they just sort of do regularly and check in throughout and take part all throughout these conversations.
And I think that also, sort of goes to why we generally want comments to be valued, in a similar amount to posts, because it's not just the posting that's important; it's the conversations that are important. And so when students realize that they can earn their points from both of those behaviors, and hopefully get the social points as well for creating good posts, that they will be in there creating better conversations.
The reason that we surface this conversation ratio here as one of the four most important summary variables is because a typical discussion board would be a conversation ratio of two, right? If you do the one post, two comments kind of standard thing. What we've seen in our data is that that is not nearly enough conversation, not even close. And we would suggest that you get this ratio upward of 8, so that you have fewer posts where students are actually talking about those posts. And what we've seen over and over again is that that conversation ratio predicts every other positive outcome from communities. If we're talking about number of posts, number of comments, how much students are reacting to each other, how many posts they view, uh, course dropout goes down in communities with higher conversation ratios. Uh, we've done studies with ASU, a 20,000 student study, where individual conversation ratios were tied to grades. Students that had more conversation uh, had better grades. Um, so so this conversation ratio is super important, and focusing on getting conversations going is what I would do, and part of that is really getting students to come back and think of this as more than just a once a week 2 hour assignment every week or something.
So that's all the questions that we have. Feel free. I mean, we're still here, so if you have any other questions, we're happy to take them. In fact, I could even put on audio at this point. Thank you, Colleen. Thanks for coming. And I guess people seem to be filing out. Please be careful as you leave the building, and watch out for the slippery roads. Hope we were able to help you out, and we hope to see you next time. So thanks again, everybody.